Good morning, US. Good morning, Europe. Good afternoon, Europe, and good evening, China. It's my pleasure to be introducing this symposium supported by MicroPort. My name is Alexandra Lansky from Yale. And it's wonderful to see so many friendly faces on this Zoom. I'm here with many friends, including Drs. Leon, Dr. Wines, Dr. Joubeau, Dr. Jean Bourgueux, and Andreas Bambach. So in the next hour, we're going to be discussing the results of three different, very well-conducted clinical studies evaluating very different devices. So the first one is going to be the Future 2. I think one of the more exciting trials presented here at PCR. This is going to be the 12-month results of a new scaffold. Then we're going to be discussing the four-year results of Target All Comers, which is a biodegradable polymeric drug-eluting stent. And then lastly, we're going to be hearing about the four-year results of the VitaFlow TAVR device for severe aortic stenosis. We're going to have plenty of time for discussion during this next hour. And I really want to encourage you to be very interactive and send your questions in through the chat. Our chat master is Andreas Bambach, and he will be there to answer your questions and to bring them into the discussion here in the next hour. So with that, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Professor Joubeau from Fuwai Hospital in Beijing, and chairman of CIT. He's presenting the of Future 2, a randomized clinical study of the finasteride sirolimus-eluting Firesorb BRS in de novo coronary lesions.
It's a pleasure and honor to present the Future 2 trial on behalf of Professor Gao and our investigators. As we know, first-generation sequestrate BRS were associated with unexpected device-related adverse outcome at long-term follow-up. The most competing explanation appears to be strut thickness, which is almost twice that of metallic stent, resulting in greater protrusion space and turbulence flow, delayed re-endothelialization, and unfavorable dismantling during the resorption process. The Firesorb BRS, manufactured by MicroPort's Shanghai, is a thinner strut, PRLA-based sirolimus-eluting BRS, designed to decrease luminal protrusion and improve the local hemodynamics profile. This is a design of the Firesorb. You can see this crystalline PRL backbone system, aluminum coated with PDLR mixed with sirolimus, and using accurate and precise point spraying technique. And this OCT imaging from the first immense study, and this the backbone is designed to be absorbed around in 3 years. And in this study, in the present study, the device with diameter 2.5 millimeter and 2.75 millimeter, the thickness is 100 micron. And for diameter between 30 to 40 millimeter, the thickness is 125 microns. You can see this Future 2 is a multi-center randomized trial. The patient with age between 18 and 70 years old with evidence of myocardial ischemia suitable for elective PCI, maximally 2 de novo coronary lesions in different epicardial coronary vessels, and lesion length less than 25 millimeter, diameter between 2.5 and 40 millimeter will be randomized 1-to-1 to Firesorb BRS group or a coronary ES group. There was an OCT subgroup with 40 subjects in either group. The clinical follow-up was planned at 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, annually up to 5 years. The angiography and OCT follow-up was scheduled at 1 year. The primary endpoint was in-segment loss for non-inferiority testing, and the key secondary endpoint was proportional cover strut by OCT, powered for non-inferiority and subsequent superiority testing. Finally, a total of 528 patients from 28 Chinese centers were assessed for eligibility, and 433 patients were randomized to Firesorb group 215 versus science group 218. The 1-year clinical follow-up more than 98%, and the 1-year angiography follow-up more than 87%. This slide shows you the key baseline characteristic. Two groups very well balanced. Mean age 56 years old, more than 70% male, diabetes 27%, more than 50% of target vessel located in the LED. Relatively bigger reference, vessel diameter 2.91 millimeter, lesion length 15.3 millimeter. If you look at the procedural characteristics, almost 100% predilation in both groups. However, the Firesorb had much higher post-dilation, 95% as compared to Zion's group. And immediate post-procedure, Firesorb had greater in-device percentage of diameter stenosis and smaller MRD and accurate gain as compared to Science. Both groups showed excellent, very high device lesion and clinical success rate. For the primary analysis of the primary endpoint in segment weight loss, in the patient level analysis, 0.17 millimeter for Firesorb, 0.19 millimeter for Science. The difference is minus 0.005, and the upper 97.5% confidence interval 0.06, below the pre-specified non-inferiority margin 0.18. So the primary non-inferiority was met. This result was further confirmed by the analysis from the lesion level and the GEE model. Also, this slide shows you the cumulative frequency distribution for 1-year weight loss. You can see these two curves almost identical. You can see for the 1-year angiographic result, the Firesorb still had greater percentage diameter stenosis in device and smaller in-device MRD as compared with Science, but the binary stenosis rate was generally low in both groups and comparable in between the device, 2.1% for Firesorb, 3.5% for Science. For the key secondary endpoint, the proportional cover strut as assessed by OCT in the strut level analysis, 99.3% for Firesorb, 98.8% for Zeiss. The non-inferiority testing, non-inferiority was made, however, superiority was not made. This result was further confirmed by the cross-section level analysis, similar result. Importantly, we can see the proportion of incomplete strut apposition was much lower in Firesorb group as compared with Science group at both post-procedure and at 1 year. And the mean thickness of strut coverage was 76 microns for Firesorb and 108 for Science. In the clinical follow-up, at 1 year, target lesion failure 1.9% for Firesorb, 3.3% for Science. POCE 8% was 17.9%, mainly driven by 1 year is any revascularization. However, we didn't see any safety concern, especially no definite probable device thrombosis were observed in either group. So in conclusion, this multi-center randomized Future 2 trial demonstrated Firesorb VRS was non-inferior to corpus ES for the primary endpoint of 1 year angiographic in segmentary loss. Firesorb was also non-inferior to Science for the powered secondary endpoint, a key secondary endpoint of 1 year proportional cover strut by OCT. And the 1 year reach of adverse clinical events, including TRF, POCE, and device thrombosis, were generally low and comparable between the two devices for the treatment of non-complex de novo coronary lesions. The present study proved the midterm safety and efficacy of the single-strut Firesorb BRS and might give an opportunity to the comeback of PRRA-based BRS with improved physical and mechanical properties. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much, Jubo. I think, you deserve congratulations. The study was amazing. It was beautifully conducted. I think it was very thoughtful in terms of how you did that. I wonder if we could start off the conversation here by talking about the device itself. You highlight some of the differences between this device and the BBS. Can we just kind of highlight that again? It's thinner struts, but I think there's more to it than that. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that.
I think this device is so-called customized, and for the size, diameter 2.5 to 2.75, because we are going to use this device in the smaller vessel, so 100 micron, the thickness. And for the relatively bigger size, it's 125 micron. So PRRA based, try to maintain the decrease the thickness of the device, but try to maintain the radial force. This is the original ideas.
Is the crystalline PLLA, does that have anything to do with the low recoil that we see in your study?
According to our finding, either in first in-man study, also in this randomized trial, we think the recoil, either acute recoil or late recoil, the result is excellent, at least comparable with mechanic device.
Okay. So, Marty, I'm gonna turn it over to you. So, when we started looking at the BBS, I mean, the results were outstanding in the early evaluations, right? Simple lesions, etc. And I think it led to a whole hype. So I wonder if you think that these device changes are sufficient, or is it, do we need to be, more careful in terms of selection, etc.?
Thank you, Alexandra. Well, first, let me congratulate Jubo and his team. This was a flawlessly conducted study, which is very impressive to us. So the fact that you're able to, in the midst of a pandemic, get the kind of follow-up and the quality outcomes is really a credit to your team and to the quality of the science. I'll make 3 quick points. First, I do think what you said, Alexandra, is correct, that when we began with bioresorbable scaffolds, I think we all acknowledged that it was pretty much very early stage, almost prototype technology. From a science and technology standpoint, this is clearly several generations beyond what we had previously been exposed to in the early days of BBS in the absorb trials. Thinner struts, abluminal drug content, sirolimus at correct doses, a 3-year dissolution time, a geometry that allows good vessel coverage, and all reflecting in better results with some, but relatively minor recoil early and no early safety signals. So I think the science really does contribute to the clinical outcomes. We've learned that with vaccines, and we're learning that now with bioresorbable scaffolds. Second, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I think that our colleagues were really smart to do a careful randomized trial in non-complex patients, non-complex lesions, with good follow-up at a year. So that gives us a good framework to go forward. So I think that the initial study population was well chosen, and I think gives us encouragement that we can begin regaining momentum. And next, this is just the beginning. We certainly have to look at late follow-up. As you know, many of the negative safety consequences occurred late with BBS. So we only have 1 year follow-up. So we need to examine that further. I would ask you, Bo, the DAPT recommendations for this device, since it's not fully absorbed for several years. Do you predict that all patients will need long-term DAPT? It wasn't clear to me if all these patients had IVUS guidance for sizing and to assist with post-dilatation. Is that going to be a requirement in using these devices in the future? And then the next steps are, how would you introduce this into targeted populations where the bioresorbable scaffold would be most useful compared to a metallic scaffold, which I think is going to be exciting next steps.
Yeah.
So on that, I'm sorry, Jabo. So, I think, one of the lessons learned from BBS was this whole procedural PSP, pre-dilation, sizing, post-dilation. So my question to you, Jabo, is how important is that? How much of that did you actually include in your clinical study? And as we look forward, the key point is to make this successful as, in the next phase. How important and what did you include in your subsequent study?
Thank you, both Marty and Alexandra. These are all important questions. I think several issues we must consider when we restart this new BRS program. Number one, must carefully select patient and the target lesions. So you can see the reference vessel diameter is 2.9 millimeter. That means the cohort is a bigger vessel. So we try to avoid to implant this device in very small vessel. This is I think it is very important. Number two, post-dilatation, almost 100%, 96%. That's very, very helpful. And in OCT, you can see the after post-dilatation, this thinner strut device can be well embedded to the vessel wall, which is significantly different to the early generation. And third, I think just like Chinese doctor performed very well in the absorbed China, their sizing is very good. I think according to the operator's eye, not according to intravascular imaging, the sizing is almost perfect because the mean device diameter is 3.19 millimeter according to the reference vessel diameter. Regarding DAPT, we recommend at least 1 year, but remember the design of the study. Design of the study was in 2016. Now, according to Professor Junbo Ge and many other important KOL suggestions, we think even with the new generation device, we should maintain the APT for long and see what happens. So for the next step, the ongoing Future 3 is an objective performance criteria single arm study with the 1 year TRF as primary endpoint. This study are enrolling patients now, and more than 1,000 patients from 50 sites. So let's see what happens in the future. Absolutely, we will continue to follow up all the patients up to 5 years.
Brilliant. That's great. So, let me ask William the next question. We want this obviously to be successful. So we've had many discussions previously in the context of BBS about the patient population, who should we be targeting, and many lessons learned. Of course, I think it just, it opened up too quickly to patients that were much too complex. So can we revisit that conversation, William? Who should we be targeting for this so that, we can ensure that it's going to be a successful program?
Thank you, Alexandra. And allow me one word to thank all of you for joining PCR and supporting us in these difficult times. Thank you. Thank you very much. So, yes, I mean, this is a very important step towards regaining confidence and trust that this technology is going to be helpful for some patients. And I realized that, there's many steps needed, but at the same time, maybe we should decide or think of where we want to bring this. In the end, as you said, who are the patients who will benefit the most? And I don't know about you, but talking and listening to colleagues who have used a lot of them, I've been very impressed with the late results of long diffuse LEDs. So going for an unmet need, the sort of diffuse LED where you don't want to place all this metal. And for instance, if you run a wire, you will see that there is a progressive decline of pressure, meaning that there is, focal treatment will not help. So in my mind, having seen some of the late results with horrible vessels, 4 years later, you almost don't recognize the LED. I say, gee, that is something for a bioresorbable device. And I think that, Kshubo, you've really modified, and this device is much better than the ones used before. Obviously, the plastic load to get rid of is less per unit length. You have quarter size, so you can really adjust it to the vessel, and we could nicely go for a tapering vessel. The main issue that I see remaining, and I'm not saying we should go in that direction now, but I see it as the distant, what would be the unmet need that we can fix with it? The main problem I think remains is the acute result, because recoil, as you measured it carefully, is the same, but MLD is less. So there is a scaffolding issue. And when we talk about preparation, yes, but maybe that is not enough if we want to go for long, perhaps calcified vessels, diffuse disease. Maybe there is something to say about plaque modification in addition to simple pre-dilatation. What do you?
Okay, so thank you, William. So, we could go on talking about this topic, I think, for a while. Can I just get a poll from the group? Who thinks that this actually is the beginning, a new beginning for scaffolds? Just raise your hand. Okay, so I think, we have a consensus here. This is very exciting. And thank you again, Kshubo. I think this is phenomenal. All right, so we're going to move on to our next presentation here. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Andreas Baumbach from Barts in London. And he's going to be presenting the 4-year results of the target all-comers. So
hello, my name is Andreas Baumbach, and it gives me great pleasure on behalf of the Target AC Steering Committee and the investigators to present the Target All-Comers trial 4-year results. These are my conflicts. The Firehawk stent, a thin strut cobalt chromium stent which contains sirolimus with biodegradable polymer applied to recessed abdominal grooves, is designed to minimize polymer burden and reduce drug concentrations in the vessel wall. The Target All-Comers study recently reported non-inferiority of target lesion failure at 1, 2, and 3 years with the Firehawk stent compared to the Xience durable polymer everolimus eluting stent. In the present study, we report the 4-year clinical outcomes of the Target All-Comers study. This is a schematic of the stent platform, and you can see the abdominal grooves and the drug sirolimus with a release profile of 90% of the drug released in 90 days. This is an overview of the Target All-Comers study, which was an open-label, non-inferiority trial. All patients with symptomatic coronary artery disease eligible for DES implantation were enrolled. You will see from the patient characteristics later on that this was a true all-comers study. The primary endpoint was target lesion failure, ARC-defined, which is a composite of cardiovascular death, target vessel MI, or ischemia-driven target lesion revascularization. We are now out to 4 years. We will follow all patients for 5 years. This is the flow of the patient follow-up on the right-hand side. We're now down to 4 years and have still a follow-up of 94% in both groups, with 705 and 715 reported follow-ups. It is important to just have another look at the patient and lesion characteristics, despite the fact that they have been reported before. I would like to point out the fact that there were 30% of non-STEMI or STEMI ACS patients. There was a large proportion of long lesions and multiple vessel treatments. The B2C criteria were present in about 80% of the population. And we had side branch stents in 20% and calcium treatment in 6%. This is basically the essential result. Target lesion failure, the Kaplan-Meier curve now out to 4 years. And you can see there is no difference between the two treatment curves, between the Firehawk and the Xience durable polymer stent. In numbers, you can see a low absolute number of target lesion failure of 14.6% and 13.7%. These are obviously not different. A low number of target vessel failure. And then the patient-oriented cardiac events in 25% in one group and 24% in the other group. Death at 8.7 and 7.9%, not different, no difference in cardiac death, no difference in any myocardial infarction and target vessel myocardial infarction. Further numbers here, revascularization rates very low, 17.8 and 17.5%. That is 4 years after the initial treatment. Any target vessel revascularization, 10%. Ischemia-driven target vessel revascularization, the number that is important for the stent treatment, 6.7% versus 7%. Not different and very low numbers. Definite or probable stent thrombosis, 2.3 versus 2.9%, not different. And we're now very late new stent thrombosis, only 1.2% in the Firehawk group and 1.8% in the Xience group. This is a graphic illustration of some of these endpoints. The target lesion failure we have is depicted here. Cardiac death, target vessel MI, and then ischemia-driven target lesion revascularization. And you can appreciate there is no difference between those curves. So in conclusion, the 4-year follow-up of the target all-comers study shows similar safety and efficacy profiles for the Firehawk and the Xience stent. The incidence of target lesion failure and patient-oriented cardiac events beyond 1 year was low and comparable for both treatment arms, with a low rate of stent thrombosis in a broad all-comers population. I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, so thank you for that, Andreas. I think that was great and really wonderful to see that the results are robust out to 4 years. I wonder if you could comment. I mean, you were one of the highest enrollers in this study in terms of the types of lesions, the complexity, and the overall results in those types of lesions.
Yes, thank you for that question. We've shown many cases of what has actually gone into this study at the time, with other investigators also becoming very confident. It is really fair to say that after an initial, getting used to the new stent, we were very comfortable with it and did not hesitate to use it in all comers. In bifurcations, we did culottes, we did left mains. Within the size range, we did pretty much everything. It is a workhorse stent in our hands.
Mm-hmm. Great. So, maybe I'm going to ask William, you were part of this clinical program. One of the things that struck me, two things actually. One is the MACE rate. So the patient-oriented outcomes were about 25% at 4 years, which to me seemed a little bit high. And also, the very late stent thrombosis, same in both groups, but still, I mean, it seemed a little bit high to me. Do you want to comment on that? What do you think is going on? Is it medical therapy? Is it just the patient population, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you, Alexandra. Of course, we looked at this while preparing our session, and I did a little bit of homework comparing with randomized trials using other devices of the same type, particularly in terms of strut thickness around 80. And it's true that if you take the same primary endpoint, like target lesion failure, the numbers here seem to be slightly higher. If you compare to, only 1 or 2% higher compared to other studies like Century, 5 years, Dissolve, 3 years, etc. But of course, we have the power of randomization here that shows that it's no different compared to science, and we're lucky we have that randomization. So the question really is, as Andreas alluded to, is it related to the all-comer design and the fact that we've enrolled severe patients, long lesions, etc., which I think is the case. There is a small question mark around COVID. Is there any indication that we could have had slightly higher event rates because of not necessarily direct, but perhaps also indirect COVID effects?
Yeah, and I think, based on what we saw, we didn't see a direct relationship between COVID. We did look at that, and I think that's an important point. Marty, this is a biodegradable stent, polymeric stent, right? And I think the promise has been that, there'd be less inflammation and potentially better results long term. Of course, the study is powered for non-inferiority, but, can you comment on that? Are we kind of barking up the wrong tree? Is it the design of the studies? Just if you, put that in context for us.
Certainly, this is, another well-conducted study. It's a large randomized trial, all comers, literally everyone, left mains, CTOs, STEMIs, non-STEMIs, bifurcations. As Andreas said, he treated pretty much everything. There were essentially no exclusions, which is really exciting to see an all-comer study like this. But when I look at the new technology, many years ago, we talked about the promise of a biodegradable polymer, DES, that it would potentially yield better results, perhaps from the standpoint of safety or late events, that perhaps we'd be able to reduce the duration of dual antiplatelet therapy. These were some of the promises. What I tend to see, and this study certainly confirms that, is that yes, it appears to be as good as a durable polymer drug-eluting stent, which is among the best in class. But I don't really see the differentiation suggesting that there's any element of superiority. Now, they're going to be doing the Target First study, which is going to be a 1 month versus 12-month DAP study. They just began to enroll. in that study. So maybe they'll have some interesting data with short-term DAPT. Maybe in studies like this, we can look at some of the more complex lesion subsets and see if there's a differentiation in the more complex lesion subsets. So that would be interesting to do a landmark analysis at a year onward in lesion subsets to see if there's any evidence or anything that would generate a hypothesis suggesting superiority. But at least to this point, even though I think this is a great stent, the results are excellent, equal to the durable polymer DES. I'm struggling to find if there's anything that is uniquely different that would cause me to want to use this versus what we currently have.
Can you just quickly comment about the status of the US IDE trial? I believe you're leading that.
Yeah, that's an interesting trial. Again, it's a randomized trial, and it is on the verge of beginning. So we expect that it will take approximately 1 year to enroll. The design of the study is not going to provide greater clarity in terms of the unique characteristics of this device, but certainly should fulfill what would be the FDA regulatory criteria for approval in the United States. So that study, Target 4, is, again, now in the process of beginning to activate and ramp up, and we'll hopefully be able to present some results at PCR in the coming years.
Excellent. Okay. All right. Well, I think we can discuss this and, for much longer, but we're going to have to move on to our next session. So thank you all for a great discussion here. So it's my pleasure to introduce Jean-Bo Ge from Shanghai, who's going to be talking about the 4-year results of the VitaFlow TAVR system for patients with severe aortic stenosis.
So hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to present the 4-year clinical outcome of the MicroPort VitaFlow transcatheter aortic valve system in patients with severe aortic stenosis. I do not have any potential conflict of interest to report. So this report should include in these 3 parts: the device introduction, study design, and the 4-year clinical outcome. This device was a bovine pericardial leaflet with anti-calcification treatment, and it has double PET skirt for the beta sealing, and it is a self-expanding nitinol frame system. The device is designed with large cells in the upper part with low density cells, which is easy to go through aortic arch and enable coronary access afterwards in the future when it is needed. And in the lower part, it is composed with high density cells, which provide a higher radial force, and especially for the calcified bicuspid valves with optimal anchoring. And in the very lower part, it is also designed with inner and outer skirt just for the beta sealing and to prevent the paravalvular leakage. And the system is now have 4 size: 21, 24, 27, and 30. The delivery system is composed of the motorized handle, and it is electric, and with reinforced inner and outer shaft. And this is the delivery profile now used for this 4 size is 16 to 18 French. The purpose of the study was to evaluate the safety and the effectiveness of VitaFlow valve and the delivery system in symptomatic patients with severe calcific aortic stenosis who are considered unsuitable for surgical valve replacement. But this study was conducted 5 years ago. It was a prospective, multi-center, single-arm trial we supposed to enroll 110 patients. All patients will be followed at 30 days, 6 months, 12 months, and 2 to 5 years post the TAVR. The primary endpoint of the study was to observe the all-cause mortality at 12 months. The secondary endpoint, including device success, procedure success, major stroke, valve performance, improvement of heart function, major adverse cardiac and cerebrovascular event, improvement of life quality, etc. My hospital, Zhongshan Hospital, Fudan University, is the leading PI center, and the co-PI center was Firehawk Hospital, and the second affiliate hospital of Zhejiang University School of Medicine, and the West China University Sichuan Hospital. We have invited the independent clinical event committee. The CT core laboratory was conducted by Dr. Niccolò Piazza. As I mentioned, 110 patients was enrolled in this study. The mean age was 77.7 years old, and half is a male, and the mean STS score was 8.84. Nearly 2/3 of all patients, nearly half of the patient with coronary artery disease and with hypertension, and 24 patients of this 1110 patients with COPD. And what I want to point out is, of all this enrolled patient, 1/3, that means 42 cases of these 110 cases was bicuspid aortic valve, and 86 patients with non-bicuspid aortic valve, and with good ejection fraction. The effective orifice area was 0.64 square centimeter. The mean gradient was 60 millimeter mercury. This slide illustrates that the route and also the valve size. 90% of all the cases, 94% of all the cases was transfemoral, and we have 5% transcarotis and 1% with transascending aorta. And more than half of all the valves are 24 millimeter in diameter, and 31 is 27, and the 21 and the 30 millimeters in a minority of patients. This slide illustrates that the improvement of this valve area. You will find that the mean effective orifice area increases dramatically just after procedure, and it stays stable until 1 year follow-up. And also the pressure gradient reduced dramatically after procedure, and also stay stable during follow-up. Yeah, this is the echo data illustrates the paravalvular leakage at 1 year. This is our by discharge, 1 month follow-up, 6 months follow-up, and 12 months follow-up. And you will find that this majority is only mild to traceable leakage. There is only very minor of this moderate. This is actually the most important slide of this study. You will find this by 4 year follow-up, the all-cause mortality on 12.7%, cardiovascular mortality 7%, and with very nice long-term follow-up results. Therefore, in conclusion, good hemodynamic result at 1 year follow-up, low all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality rate at 1 year follow-up. All-cause mortality rate at 4 year follow-up was 12.7%, and cardiovascular mortality rate at 4 year follow-up 7.2%. The 4-year clinical outcomes support the safety and efficacy of this MicroPort VitaFlow in the treatment of patients with severe aortic stenosis. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Jambo. That was fantastic results. I think mixed patient population, and I think certainly very promising. Monty, I wonder if you could put it in context of some of the studies and devices that have been evaluated in the US.
Thank you, Alexandra. And Jimbo, again, congratulations. This is an important study. These were high-risk patients. The mean age was around 78. The STS score was 8.8, which puts it into a high-risk category. About a third were bicuspids, many comorbidities. So this is a high-risk group of patients. And to have an all-cause mortality at 1 year in a high surgical risk AS population of less than 3% is very, very impressive. So I have to say the results are quite good. Some other interesting findings: the pacemaker rate was very acceptable in the mid-teens. The PVL rate, especially given the frequency of the bicuspid disease, the moderate severe PVL was in the 1% to 2% range, which is extremely low, which is again very encouraging. They were smart using CT scans for sizing and having a CT core lab to be able to adjust the size. So I think that helped them to correctly select the size. The results up to a year are excellent. When we look at 1 to 4 years, this is such an elderly comorbid population that there's an expected linear increase in mortality. And we see that there are additional events, both all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. Of course, we need to look at that more carefully to make sure that we're not seeing late conduction system abnormalities or other things that might be device-related, but I suspect it's more the underlying population. And very consistent with other high-risk trials in terms of seeing a linear increase in mortality over time. The only piece of missing data, it would have been nice to have echo data at 4 years, because we're always interested to see what the structural valve deterioration is. This is a bovine pericardial self-expanding device, supraannular in location, very good early hemodynamics. It would be interesting to see if the hemodynamics were preserved at 4 years.
So, obviously in a bicuspid patient population, potentially younger patients, I think to your point, Monty, I agree having echoes longer term would be very helpful. And Jumbo, I don't know if you plan to have additional follow-up and some echo data there. I think that would be great. The other question I have for you is coronary access. So I wonder if you could comment on those two issues.
Okay, thank you very much for the question. Actually, we followed carefully all the patients. As I pointed out, we have only less than 13% of the mortality of all-cause mortality in this group of patients. Because this study was conducted for the approval by the NMPA, the National Medical Product Agency, for the launching of the device. Therefore, this patient was very carefully for every single patient followed up, and we try to present the data to the administration and to get approved and launching to the market. And first of all, the patient in this group patient, we have 42 cases, and if you compare the age of to the tricuspid, the age is younger in that group, and but we do not find any difference regarding the hemodynamics between bicuspid and tricuspid, because by the enrollment of the patient, we discussed if we should only enroll tricuspid or we also include bicuspid together, because theoretically, according to the consensus, bicuspid is not recommended in the early trial. Therefore, because by previous observation, we have nearly half, at least 1/3 of all the patients with aortic stenosis, they are bicuspid. Through careful discussion, we decided to include bicuspid in this group. Therefore, we have, as I mentioned, 42 cases of all the 1110 patients. Secondly, regarding the coronary access, theoretically, because we have a bigger cells of this ascending aorta, it should be easier to get coronary access. But we do have several cases with ischemia. We call patient back. We do the coronary angiogram, but it is extremely difficult using now the guiding catheter, especially the EBU XB guidings. I wrote a comment. It's not yet published. I think we found that by this group of specific group of after tower patient, joint catheter is much easier to cannulate the coronary ostium compared with the more stronger supporting catheter. I know it is very difficult, but it is the key. It is true the situation using joint guiding is better than that of the stronger supporting, because no matter the bigger or smaller the cells, it is still a very difficult situation to cannulate the coronary arteries.
I wonder, Jambo, if you looked at the bicuspid. I mean, I know the numbers are small, but did you look at the bicuspids as a standalone cohort to look at the outcomes, whether it be, on echo or longer term follow-up?
I do not have the data in my hand, but we followed every patient carefully up. Maybe I can show the result afterwards. Compared this, we have 14 patients died by the 4 years of this group of patients, which is nearly 13%, 12.7%, and we try to compare the hemodynamics maybe to give the results. I do not have in my hand now.
Okay, no worries. Thank you. So next steps for VitaFlow in terms of an approval in China, is it approved?
It also already approved last year by the MPA.
Okay, excellent. So it sounds like the evaluation for approval, at least for valves, is a lower threshold than what we've seen for the drug.
Another point, because we have a short time, another point is this the delivery system is an electric handle. You can easily to position, and during deliver, you can slightly forward and pull back the device without the manually send forward and backward.
Okay, excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. I want to thank everybody for their contributions, comments, etc., and the talks. I just want to quickly summarize the past hour. I think we've had 3 very great discussions. Well, I'll start with VitaFlow. I think we've seen excellent results at 4 years, inclusion of a mixed population, including bicuspid patients and tricuspid aortic stenosis. Before that, we talked about the target all-comers study, demonstrated non-inferiority with the Firehawk in a 1-to-1 randomized clinical study in complex lesions. Again, a very broad spectrum of patients and lesions were included. And then the first presentation from Joubeau was Future 2, the first randomized thin strut BRS compared to Science met non-inferiority in terms of late lumen loss with great clinical results, very promising, and we all hope will lead to the revival of scaffolds. So we'll stay tuned for that. Again, I want to thank all the speakers, our panelists, all the comments, and for a great session. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye-bye.
day.
Bye-bye.